All right, these are the top 5 NFL teams that are having the best offseason in 2024 so far. Look, I know after April, after the NFL draft, we're probably going to have a brand new top 5 list. But until then, this is who is just crushing it this offseason so far. All right, number 5 is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I know they didn't have the sexiest offseason by any means. They didn't go out and sign the massive free agent that everybody was looking at, blah, 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 blah. Got it. They didn't do any of that. What they did is they retained key pieces that make their roster as good as it was last year. And it's a team that had ups and downs over the season, but ultimately did win the division, ultimately did win a playoff game. This offseason, they re-signed Mike Evans, they re-signed Baker Mayfield, and then they franchise tagged Antoine Winfield Jr. This is a team that doesn't have a ton of vulnerabilities, but could definitely use some help on defensive line, could use some help at inside linebacker, could use a little bit of help in the secondary, specifically cornerback. So I'd expect them to address that in the draft. But overall, so far, that's the 5th best offseason is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Number 4, it's the New Jersey Giants. And believe me, I am more surprised than anyone that this team even made my top 5 list. But as I was doing research and looking at all the moves that all the teams made this offseason, I just understood very clearly what the Giants are doing here. I'm not saying it doesn't sting that they lost Saquon Barkley. That's a huge loss. But honestly, this is one of those teams that's not like a piece away or 2 pieces away from being a legitimate contender. This is a team that needs to bounce back from a horrible offseason last offseason when they gave that massive $160 million contract to Daniel Jones. After all, he threw was 15 touchdowns. Yes, that's a real stat. He literally threw 15 touchdowns one season, and that following offseason got $160 million. I guess 15 touchdowns is enough for $160 million in the state of New Jersey. So the Giants have to bounce back from that. And you know what they did this offseason? They went out and they signed Drew Lock for $5 million. Reportedly, they told Drew, you're going to have a chance to compete for the starting job, which if I'm Daniel Jones, I'm sweating that because honestly, it would not surprise me if Drew Lock beats Daniel Jones for the starting job. But that's just a small move that the Giants made. The Giants also signed Devin Singletary, starting to fill the gap that's left behind by losing Saquon Barkley. Okay, that move makes sense, but that's not even the biggest move they made. The biggest move the Giants made this offseason, which was a beauty, was trading essentially a 2nd and 5th round pick for Brian Burns from the Panthers. This is a guy who the Rams offered the Panthers 2 1st-round picks in 2022 to get Brian Burns, and the Panthers said no. 1 year later, the Giants are able to get him for a 2nd and a 5th. That is a brilliantly awesome move. And the Giants weren't done there. The Giants also upgraded their offensive line, signing John Runyon and signing Drain Elamanor. After arguably one of the worst off seasons in 2023, the Giants are putting together one of the best off seasons in 2024. Number 3, let's stay in the NFC East, the Philadelphia Eagles. Look, the Eagles had a very disappointing 2023 season, coming off of a tight Super Bowl loss, and then started the 2023 season as good as anybody. It was honestly looking like they were going to repeat and go back to the Super Bowl. They wound up losing 6 of their last 7 games, lost in the 1st round of the playoffs. People were even calling for head coach Nick Sirianni to get fired, which is wild to me, just a year removed from making it to the Super Bowl. But then if that's not all bad enough, 6-time All-Pro, 7-time Pro Bowl center Jason Kelce retired. So now the Eagles are left with a huge hole in the middle of their offensive line. Since then, however, what have they done? They went out and they got Saquon Barkley, arguably the best running back in the league. On defense, they've signed Brian Huff. They re-signed Brandon Graham. They signed CJ Gardner-Johnson. They also added some depth at quarterback by trading a couple of 7s and a 3rd for Kenny Pickett and a 4th for Kenny Pickett and a 4th back. Now that might sound a little high giving up a 3rd, but let's keep in perspective that Kenny Pickett was the 20th overall pick in 2022. Look, the Eagles are making moves. In the draft, I'm expecting that they're going to address center with the 22nd overall pick. They could get the center from Oregon, Jackson Powers Johnson, who seems to be the consensus for the best center in this draft. He should be hanging right there for them at 22nd overall pick. Number 2, and nobody's talking about them, which is surprising. They've won back-to-back Super Bowls. They've won 3 Super Bowls in the last 5 years, and nobody's talking about their offseason. The Kansas City Chiefs. Look, following a Super Bowl championship, teams have a really hard time retaining players and coaches. That's for a few reasons. Usually, in order for you to make it to a Super Bowl in the modern era, you have a quarterback that is still on their rookie deal. You have players that are on the back end of their rookie contracts, so they've got the experience where they're playing really well, but they're cheap because they're still on a rookie deal, but now they're on the cusp of getting paid. You have coordinators that are about to leave for head coaching positions. And then you have veteran players that are either retiring or looking to get one more big contract. So it's really hard to keep the formula that got you to the Super Bowl. It's really hard to keep all of that because everybody suddenly costs a lot more. Not for the Kansas City Chiefs. This offseason, they re-signed Chris Jones, a move that I thought they would never be able to find the money to do. They did. They signed Marquise Brown, addressing the lone vulnerability in the team from a year ago, which was wide receiver. Then they tagged and traded L'Jarius Sneed. They essentially got a third-round pick back for that. So now where are the Chiefs vulnerable? Now, for anybody who's played Madden, you might recognize the graphic that I created here to really look at this and see, hey, where are the Chiefs vulnerable? The only real move on offense is going to be that wide receiver 3 slot receiver position. Even if you have to stick with Justin Watson made some plays for them last year. I think the Chiefs would be fine moving forward with Justin Watson as the number 3 receiver. Having said that, it's a deep wide receiver draft class. I expect they'll be able to get a guy if they want a guy. Other than that, you're just looking to add depth on offense. Defensively, you're still solid. Last year, the Chiefs were a top 3 defense. And with the 32nd pick in the draft, I'm kind of expecting that they'll go corner since they no longer have Sneed. Look, the Chiefs are quietly putting together one of the best off seasons in 2024, and they're doing it by just hanging on to all the right pieces. I get the feeling that might be enough to get them to three-peat. All right, some teams didn't make the list because they really only made like one move so far this offseason or didn't do quite enough to make it into the top 5. I'm expecting that some of these teams can probably crack in following the draft, but I did want to give some honorable mentions here. So first, we do have to talk about the Baltimore Ravens, who did something tremendous this offseason. They signed Derrick Henry, which I think could make them just as explosive as they were in 2019. Remember in 2019, the first time that Lamar Jackson won the MVP award? You know what he had going for him in that offense? He was able to do a lot of read option stuff because he had Mark Ingram in the backfield with him, and they did a lot of dangerous stuff, very similar to what Russell Wilson and Marshawn Lynch did back in 2013-2014 timeframe. I think with Derrick Henry, the Ravens can go right back to being that explosive all over again, if not more explosive. So that was a great signing by the Ravens. The Falcons signed Kirk Cousins, was kind of their lone big move this offseason so far. He was the most sought after quarterback this offseason cycle, and he's definitely an upgrade from Desmond Ridder, definitely an upgrade from Taylor Heineke. The Packers signed Josh Jacobs, which honestly is kind of a downgrade from Aaron Jones. They had Aaron Jones, but then had to let him go because the only way to keep him would have been for him to take a pay cut. He wasn't willing to do that. Reasonable on his part. So Aaron Jones wound up going in the division to the Vikings. The Packers had to make some moves just to take care of their salary cap. Josh Jacobs is a cheaper option. And then by loyalty requirements, I have to talk about the Seahawks at least once per video. As far as the Seahawks offseason is going, they dumped Jamal Adams about damn time. Unfortunately, they had to move on from Quandre Diggs. I hate that because Quandre was so good for the Seahawks for a bunch of years there, but it was time. And then they didn't re-sign Bobby Wagner. It's kind of cool that Bobby Wagner does get to go play for Dan Quinn again, though. Bobby Wagner signed with the Commanders, so he'll be under Dan Quinn, who coached him early in his career in Seattle. So that's kind of cool for him. Look, overall, what the Seahawks are doing this offseason, they're rebuilding the team in Mike McDonald's image. So there's nothing to love. There's nothing to hate so far about the Seahawks offseason. I think it's going fine. That does bring us to who has had the best offseason so far in 2024. It's the Pittsburgh Steelers. They signed Russell Wilson to a $1.2 million deal. A quarterback who was top 10 in passing touchdowns and was top 10 in rating last year to a $1.2 million deal. I know that's only 2 categories. That doesn't necessarily make him a top 10 quarterback overall. Even if you told me Russell was top 15, I can accept that. He's only costing you $1.2 million. This is a great deal for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And if that's not enough, then they went ahead and they doubled down and they traded a 6th round pick to the Bears for Justin Fields. Even if the only quarterback move the Steelers would have made this offseason would have been to go get Justin Fields, I would have said, you know what? That's an upgrade from Kenny Pickett. It's an upgrade from Mason Rudolph. It's a good move for them. Even if that was the only move they made, but it's not. They got Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. So it seems like Russell Wilson will be the starter. Justin Fields will be the backup. That's going to be a solid quarterback room. A quarterback room that combined is going to cost you less than $3 million. It's going to cost $2.8 million for the both of them. And it's not like the Steelers were a bad team last year. They did make the playoffs. You could make the argument that the Pittsburgh Steelers were just a quarterback away. A couple years years ago, the Broncos traded everything to go get Russell Wilson because they believed they were a quarterback away. I think they didn't utilize Russell properly. I actually think Russell's better than he's played the last 2 seasons. But whatever the case may be, the Broncos believed they were a quarterback away. They proved not to be. The Steelers didn't have to give up anything but a 6th-round pick to upgrade their quarterback room. And now they really could just have been a quarterback away. Think about this. They had a defense last year that allowed the 6th fewest points, meanwhile had an offense that was tied for the 2nd most turnovers. Their offense gave the ball away the 2nd most last year, and the defense still only allowed the 6th most points. So a defense that you keep putting on their heels, they're still not giving up points. And now Russell Wilson's going to run your offense, a guy who is known for being careful with the football. Look, the Steelers just made a huge jump by bringing Wilson into the building. They made a huge jump in depth by bringing Fields into the building. The Steelers are having the best offseason so far.